Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 60, Beach Blankout Blastoise. The episode begins with Ash and the gang having arrived at the harbor beyond the woods they were in, wanting to make it back to the mainland so they could go back to Viridian City. However, the boat that they needed to get back to the mainland was about to take off, and Ash and the gang were about to miss it. This was unfortunately solidified as Ash, not watching where he was going, tripped over a Wartortle who was walking by the beach. Ash immediately gets up along with the Wartortle, and Ash immediately uses his Pokedex on it, when the Wartortle then starts going apeshit in panic, trying to explain something to Ash and the gang. Ash and the gang obviously don't understand, so the Wartortle tries communicating with Pikachu, thinking another Pokemon may be able to understand, but Pikachu didn't either, so he prompts Ash to send out his Squirtle by tapping on Squirtle's Pokeball, leading Ash to do so, as Squirtle listens in to what the Wartortle was trying to say. Probably particularly understanding due to being the pre-evolution of Wartortle, so they were connected. Whatever Wartortle told Squirtle must have been pretty big, as Squirtle reacts by throwing on his gangster glasses from back when he led the Squirtle squad, and diving in the water with Wartortle, not waiting to explain to Ash where he was going. Ash and the gang then follow along in a boat that they managed to acquire somehow, which is being driven by Misty's Pokemon, such as Staryu and Starmie. Horsey was also out of its Pokeball, but I don't think Misty thought Horsey was strong enough to be able to pull an entire boat. Anyways, after a few minutes of this boating, Ash and the gang then arrive on an island that Brock reveals was not even on his fucking map. When Ash sees it, he coincidentally states that it looks like a Squirtle shell. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was close by to Ash and the gang in their boat, but they were simply underwater in their Gyarados sub. Jesse attempted to spy on Ash and the gang, as James and Meowth were simply too focused on pedaling the vehicle, which pissed them off, as they viewed spying as the easy job, and they wanted the easy job. Meanwhile, Squirtle and Wartortle had arrived on the Squirtle shell-shaped island, and were soon joined by Ash and the gang, as they all discovered Squirtle and Wartortle shells laying on the beach. Brock examines them, and hears the Wartortle and Squirtle breathing inside, so they were still alive. They must have just been sleeping. The Wartortle then gets Ash and the gang's attention, as it points up ahead towards a huge shell. Ash uses his Pokedex on it, and it's revealed that the shell belongs to Blastoise, Squirtle's final form. Ash gets very excited by the presumably really rare and strong Pokemon, and goes up to examine it, with Squirtle following, likely also being impressed by it, due to the Blastoise being its final form. Ash proceeds to hug the Blastoise, so he can truly feel its shell and its massive size, but then suddenly, him and Squirtle collapse, with Squirtle going into its shell, as they both fall asleep, leading Brock and Misty to get immensely confused. Brock and Misty immediately try and wake Ash up, but they can't seem to do anything until Misty gets the idea for Pikachu to shock Ash and all the Squirtle awake, including the ones who were asleep from before. Pikachu obliges, and as a result, Ash, along with all the Wartortle and all the Squirtle, wake up, with Misty and Brock instantly questioning Ash why the fuck he fell asleep in the first place. Ash recalls that it likely had something to do with him and Squirtle putting their ears up to the Blastoise's shell when they hugged it, revealing that when he did, he heard mysterious music coming from inside the shell that sounded familiar. Ash then confirms with all the Squirtle and Wartortle that when they all fell asleep, they heard weird music as well, and that was the reason why they were all concerned, as they didn't know why the Blastoise had fallen asleep, now being unable to wake up and able to put everyone else to sleep, leading Brock and Misty to get concerned. The reason why they were concerned was because what Pokemon was known for singing weird music that made people fall asleep? Jigglypuff. So they suspected that Jigglypuff was perhaps involved somehow, and they wanted to get the fuck away from that as soon as possible. Ash was now extremely interested in the mystery regarding Blastoise, though, and wanted to help out the Squirtle and Wartortle in any way he could, so he denied Misty and Brock's request to leave, stating that they had to help if they could. Misty comments how she should have expected Ash to say something like that, due to him always wanting to help Pokemon, and Brock and Misty agree to help him, as the three of them join hands, with Pikachu and Squirtle joining in. Meanwhile, Team Rocket were now out of their Gyarados sub, spying on Ash and the gang from the outside, planning to steal the Blastoise. Back on the island, in an attempt to awake Blastoise, Brock had asked the Squirtle and Wartortle to translate the entire situation from before the Blastoise fell asleep to now, hoping that getting the full picture would help them come up with a solution on how to wake the Blastoise, or at least figure out how the Blastoise fell asleep in the first place. The Squirtle and Wartortle proceeded to explain, with Brock presumably asking them yes or no questions in order to translate properly. But he had successfully managed to get a grasp of their situation, and began to explain it to the others while utilizing drawings. And as for what I mean by yes or no questions, I mean that the Squirtle probably tried to say something, and then Brock just asked them a question like, okay, did this happen? And then they nodded if yes. Anyways, Brock then begins telling the entire story that the Squirtle and Wartortle had told him, which was basically that the Blastoise was the king of all the Squirtle and Wartortle, and the island was viewed as their sacred kingdom, where a lot of Squirtle and Wartortle seemingly originated from. This leads Misty to comment during Brock's story that this island was probably the sacred Wartortle breeding grounds that she had heard rumors about, as they were both described as sacred places. Brock continues out with the story, stating that one day, the Blastoise had went out for a swim, likely to go either scouting for some food, or watch to make sure there was no potential danger, as a king would do, but it didn't come back. The Squirtle then all eventually found Blastoise's shell in the water, and proceeded to all drag it back to shore and put it on the beach. But that's when they all fell asleep, when they then put their ears up to the shell to try and listen for any sounds. One wartortle managed to avoid the effects, as he didn't listen to the shell, and it was because of this that he was able to swim off and go warn Ash and his friends of what had happened and attempt to get their help. After fully knowing the story, Brock is now just even more motivated, perhaps even more so than Ash, to find out what was going on with his Blastoise's shell, as he realized that doing so would likely severely help him with his breeding career, as being the first one to discover something about a Pokémon would likely impress a lot of other breeders, and therefore boost his reputation. In order to attempt to hear what Ash and the gang had heard being the music, he puts a stethoscope on the Blastoise, but unfortunately cannot hear anything. That is, until he hears a huge-ass grunt come from the Blastoise as its limbs start to pop out of its body, followed by its head. The Blastoise had suddenly woken up out of nowhere. This causes Ash, who was currently sitting on Blastoise's shell in an attempt to maybe apply pressure to wake it up, to then fall off of Blastoise due to his cannons then popping out, his most important feature, as that was where his attacks came from. The Squirtle are very happy to have their king back, but Ash's Squirtle isn't happy yet, as he spots something inside one of Blastoise's cannons, which appears to be a pink ball of some kind. Squirtle immediately tries to dislodge this from the Blastoise's cannon, much to Misty and Brock's dismay, as they realize what the pink ball was. Ash doesn't realize, though, until a song that they had all heard before starts playing. This causes Ash to realize, finally, that the pink thing was in fact Jigglypuff. Misty and Brock were right with their assumption after all, but before Ash can remark on this, they all swiftly fall asleep thanks to the song, including all of the Wartortle and Squirtle and Blastoise yet again. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was watching this, now seeing the perfect opportunity to capture the Blastoise, with no one around to stop them. Their plan was to tie Meowth to a rope and then cast the rope out to the beach, so that Meowth could then swim across the water and land on the beach, and then grab Blastoise, and then Team Rocket could swiftly reel him back in once he had the shell. Now, I don't know how they planned to have Meowth grab the shell, as it's pretty fucking big for Meowth, right? But anyways, Meowth successfully makes it to the island, but before he can grab Blastoise, the Jigglypuff song puts him to sleep, as the Jigglypuff was still singing. As Jesse and James look through their binoculars, they spot the fact that Meowth has fallen over, and they immediately reel him back in and realize that he has fallen asleep. So Jesse tries to wake him up by slapping him, but it fails due to Jigglypuff's singing being that strong. So Jesse simply throws Meowth to the side, fucking abusing him, and they decide to go with a different plan, being their Gyarados grabber on the Gyarados sub. The Gyarados grabber was essentially just a suction cup that was attached to a rope, and with the press of a button, the suction cup would be sent out, and it eventually reached the beach, and the suction cup attached to the Blastoise, leading Team Rocket to pull the rope it was attached to, dragging it across the sand, and eventually into their submarine. Let's go, Team Rocket actually had a successful plan for once. Meanwhile, back on the island, Jigglypuff has seemingly disappeared and stopped singing, as Ash is the first one to wake up, and he then realizes, as soon as he wakes up, that the Blastoise shell was in fact missing. Everyone else then wakes up, and Ash tries his best to calmly inform them of what had happened, and Brock and Misty are obviously receptive, but all of the Squirtle and Wartortle, they just begin instantly panicking, not sure what the fuck to do. Ash and the gang try to assure them that everything was going to be okay, because, they were still here, they were going to help them get the Blastoise shell back, but the Squirtle and Wartortle are too fucking sidetracked by their worriedness, and they don't listen. So Squirtle's like, yo, guys, shut up, and Ash's Squirtle uses water gun on all of them to, break them out of their trance, and then he goes up to a rock and begins doing this motivational speech, like how he would if he was leading the Squirtle squad, and this speech essentially motivates all of the Squirtle and Wartortle, as they all begin to chant, happily proclaiming that they were going to get their king back. Ash, Brock, and Misty watch in awe of this, with Misty commenting on how good of a leader Ash's Squirtle was. Ash thinks that it's because of his training, but Brock's like, nah, I just think all the Squirtle think his sunglasses are cool, so they'll follow him because of that. Surprisingly, none of them suggest his past as the Squirtle Squad leader. That's obviously the reason why. Anyways, Pikachu then, out of nowhere, looks around the beach and spots the tracks that were left behind from Team Rocket dragging the shell to their sub. He gets Ash and the gang's attention, and they all follow the tracks to the edge of the beach, where they then spot Team Rocket's sub drifting away, with the shell in its grasp. This obviously causes all the Squirtle and Wartortle to instantly jump into the water as they swim toward the sub, determined to get back their king. Meanwhile, back with Team Rocket, Meowth had woken up finally and realized that Jesse and James's plan was actually successful, leading him to congratulate them, and them all to congratulate each other as they celebrated with some drinks. Don't worry guys, it was orange juice. However, their happy united celebrations are short-lived, as they then proceed to get into an argument with each other on who deserved credit for the capture. Meowth thinks he does, because he had to do the hard job of swimming out to the island, but Jesse and James are like, bro, you fucking fell asleep. We were the ones who had to actually use the Gyarados grabber. And then they argue that Meowth shouldn't have credit for the capture, as he can't even own a Pokemon, being a Pokemon himself, so there would be no way for him to capture the Blastoise in a Pokeball and return it to Giovanni. He would need Jesse and James's help, so Jesse and James might as well take credit anyway. Meowth tries to rebuttal against this, but James simply responds by angrily kicking Meowth to shut him up, and when he does, it leads to two unfortunate things. Meowth was kicked against the submarine's wall, which applied enough pressure that it caused the submarine to start leaking, and therefore start sinking, and the impact of Meowth hitting the wall had also disturbed the Jigglypuff that was inside Blastoise's cannon, and in an attempt to calm itself down, it began to sing. This singing obviously put Jesse and James to sleep, as the submarine was still sinking. Fortunately for Team Rocket, the submarine doesn't sink though, and they are not lost at sea, as the Squirtle and Wartortle had arrived at the submarine by this point, and immediately lift it up and swim it back to shore, using their united strength. The Squirtle and Wartortle immediately take Blastoise's shell and free it from the sub, placing it back on the rock, as Ash and the gang's primary concern is trying to help Team Rocket, who were still asleep. I don't know why they were so set on helping Team Rocket with everything they do, but they do manage to successfully wake Team Rocket, who, surprise surprise, are not grateful at all, aside from James. Jesse and Meowth proceed to yell at Ash and the gang, accusing them of ruining their Blastoise plan, but James actually does thank Ash and the gang for saving his life, leading Jesse to get pissed off at him and beat him the fuck up. Leaving Ash and the gang to finally realize how fucked up Jesse and James' relationship was, with Ash remarking how he felt fucking pity for James, having to deal with Jesse all the time, stating how at least James was willing to thank them. Anyways, Jesse and Meowth continue to yell at Ash and the gang, which piss off the Squirtle and Wartortle, who now see Ash and the gang as their close allies. So they all surround Team Rocket, in the process guarding Blastoise's shield from them, causing Team Rocket to run away, realizing they were surrounded, and retreat to their submarine. Why would they retreat to their submarine if it clearly didn't work anymore, as it was basically destroyed from being sunk? Well, it's because the submarine actually had a second mode that could be activated, being a mech mode. So, with the press of a button, Meowth activates this mode as the submarine transforms into a mech. Although it does take a while to successfully transform, so Team Rocket have to kill the time by sarcastically apologizing multiple times, trying to fool the Squirtle and Wartortle that they were sorry. But the Squirtle and Wartortle obviously don't fall for this, so by the time the mech is fully assembled, the Squirtle and Wartortle have all begun firing water guns at it already, and seemingly had the upper hand. But since the mech is obviously waterproof, the water guns don't do any lasting damage to it, leading the mech to chase around the Squirtle and Wartortle, trying its best to absolutely fucking murder them. Ash's Squirtle tries his best to defend the rest of the Squirtle and Wartortle by going up to the mech and attacking it on its own, but this just results in Squirtle being absolutely sent flying back as he crashes into Blastoise's shell on the rock. Which was also where Ash and the gang were, who were using the Squirtle and Wartortle being chased around as a distraction in order to attempt to wake the Blastoise. However, all they were really doing was just like screaming at it to wake up, or like banging on its shell, and those efforts were obviously futile. So Ash's Squirtle and Pikachu then come up with another way to attempt to wake the Blastoise, which is to combine their water gun and thundershock attacks and use it on the Blastoise. The combined disturbance of both the electricity and the water manages to in fact wake Blastoise up as its limbs pop out of the shell once again. That's not all the electricity does though, as it also proceeds to wake up the Jigglypuff, who was still inside Blastoise's cannon, and then the electricity sends Jigglypuff blasting off inside Team Rocket's mech, unbeknownst to Team Rocket. With Blastoise now awake again, it immediately takes action in defending the Squirtle and Wartortle, fighting Team Rocket's mech by pushing it back so that it can't chase them any farther. With Jesse and James knowing that they couldn't move any farther, they just decide to then deploy the mech's grabbers in an attempt to grab Blastoise, capture him, and then simply run off. But Blastoise then uses its strength to absolutely destroy the grabbers, rendering them entirely useless. Much to Team Rocket's dismay. Even more to Team Rocket's dismay, despite the mech apparently being waterproof, when the Squirtle and Wartortle then attack the mech with all of their water guns at once, followed by Blastoise using its hydro pump, which unleashes water from its hydro cannons, it causes the mech to blast off into the air and crash into the water, absolutely destroying it. Ash then recalls how he saw the Jigglypuff land in Team Rocket's mech when Pikachu attacked it, and realizes that that must mean that Jigglypuff was still inside the mech, and might have been killed in the destruction. Meanwhile, we then cut to Jigglypuff, who's inside the remains of the mech, and he's currently singing Team Rocket to sleep in an attempt to calm himself down, because he was like, oh shit, this sub is destroyed, I'm panicking, and he sang because of that, revealing that the Jigglypuff was thankfully still alive. Ash then commands his Squirtle to go into the water and search the remains of the mech for Jigglypuff. Squirtle obliges, hopping into the water, and eventually manages to return with Jigglypuff on its back, much to everyone's relief, who had thought that Squirtle somehow got lost at sea because it took him so long to search all the remains. They certainly didn't want to lose anyone else at sea, especially after what had happened to Blastoise, but anyways, with Jigglypuff and Squirtle now back on shore, Jigglypuff takes the opportunity to celebrate by singing, leading Ash and the gang to panic, but before they can do anything, they are all put to sleep, along with the Blastoise and all the Squirtle and Wartortle. The Jigglypuff gets as pissed off as usual that everyone fell asleep to its singing, and proceeds to use the marker to draw on everyone's faces, including the Squirtle, Wartortle, Togepi, Pikachu, and the Blastoise. The Jigglypuff then disappears once again, as Ash and the gang and everyone else eventually wake up, and thankfully, they all just laugh off, having all these markings all over them now. They don't get angry or anything. Well, except for Misty, who is fuming because she states that the marker on her face makes her look like an evil cartoon villain, and I mean, she's kind of fucking right, look at that mustache. The episode then ends with everyone cleaning off the marker from their faces, and Ash and the gang saying goodbye to the Squirtle, Wartortle, and Blastoise as they get back in their boat and continue on with their journey. Meanwhile, later that night, Team Rocket are revealed to not have drowned or anything, due to grabbing onto the wrecked fin of their destroyed mech and using it as a flotation device. They simply float aimlessly, depressed at both the fact that they had failed yet again, and the fact that they had no way to wash off Jigglypuff's marker.